Hey everyone, how's it going? So I've been getting ready for the IB exams recently, which are in May, and I've just been realizing it's really hard. I've with some subjects it's very straightforward, like math. How to do it. You do practice problems and things like that. There's always the complications in every subject, but then you get subjects that are really hard, just like business management, where it's like you're given a book that's this thick, and you're told, hey, you need to know everything in this book for the exam that's coming up and not just know it, you have to know it very well. Because you don't know what's going to show up in the exam, but whatever shows up, you have to be able to explain it very completely, use it in analysis questions. There might be a 20-point question on the exam that's based on, do you know this one point that's like a sub point of a sub point in the book? And you have to apply them to case studies. It's stressful. And for me, I don't really work well with the traditional study tactics of, sit down, read, highlight, make notes. That stuff just doesn't work. What does work well for me, because I was trying to study earlier today with the typical methods, and it just was not coming in. So I was like, I like explaining things. I like talking to people. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to just explain chapters out of the book and, putting it on YouTube as a resource. So if anyone else needs it, if anyone else can take some benefit out of this, I'm very glad. But this is more than anything for me so that I can understand the material. I'm just going to try to explain it as simply and as completely as possible, so that I can be well understood. And I'll try to make it as interesting as I can. But, this is business management IB studying. So there's some limits, you know what I'm saying? But anyway, let's get started. So the first chapter is 1.1, which is the nature of business activity. Part of the topic one in the book, business organization and environment. So, what are the basics of this chapter? All right. So, the first part of this chapter is just the basics of a business. So, what is a business? What does a business want? Things like that. This is all, I think, pretty close to common sense. It's, just a business is an entity that creates a product or service, provides it to a client, typically with the goal of getting a profit. That's the most basic definition of a business. Um, there's various aspects to go into a business that we do have to take into account. The first thing is capital. Now, capital, that's the physical money that's going into a business. An investment is increasing your capital. This is how you're getting the business started. Second thing is land. Now, land is obviously the physical area that your business is operating in. So what's your headquarters, where are your factories, but also the raw materials. If you're using any raw materials in your production process, that is part of this land aspect of the business. Final thing is manpower or labor. So those are your employees. And then you have the enterprise and entrepreneurship aspects, and that basically means kind of the general management of all the other three elements. So this is the overall, given some order to this mess of a structure you have. Now, businesses have a few functions and roles that are highlighted in this chapter. Key ones are these. First is human resources. So that's management of your employees. Second is finance and accounts. So that's management of your money, your capital, as the term is. That's an important thing. Use the words like capital on the exam. The IB gives you a lot of points for that. Third thing is marketing. So that's how are you going to take your product and how are you going to get your product to the consumer. And finally, operations. That is the management of everything. So that's everything that's not included on the other three, human resources, finance and marketing. The other three that are not included in here, operations. And operations is the management of the whole thing. So that's your board of directors, that's your managers, every level of this. Now, a key point of this chapter that is highlighted, and this is a really important part, and this is one that I've struggled with, even doing practice tests, it's hard to distinguish. These are the business sectors because there are four sectors of the economy, also known as economic sectors, and it's very hard to tell them apart sometimes. And also, very often, businesses fit into more than one sector. But I'm going to do my best to summarize them in the most concise way possible, and also, give you some examples of how to distinguish them. All right, so the first one is going to be the primary sector. So this is really the foundational part of the economy because this is the harvesting of natural resources. So this is things like logging, extraction of oil from the ground, agriculture, you name it. Any kind of taking of things from the earth, that's the primary sector. These tend to be regulated and protected by the government, and they also do things like provide fuels for other economic sectors. I mentioned oil. Oil is a very important part of the primary sector. An example of this would be something like Exxon, which is drilling mines and trying to get oil out of the ground. Now, the secondary sector. This builds on top of the primary sector. This is taking the raw products and turning them into finalized goods, turning them into something that can be sold. Now, the secondary sector has two aspects to it because you can take the raw products from the primary sector and make two things out of it. You can either make a finished good or a component good. A finished good is something that you are selling directly to a consumer. So, that's me producing a product and selling it right to you. A component good is selling it to a company that's in the tertiary sector, which we'll get to in a second. So that's just kind of two different ways of doing it. Finished good to the consumer, component good to another company who will then sell it to the consumer. An example, two examples would be Coca-Cola and Honda, right? Coca-Cola is a good example of a component good because what do? You never go to the Coke store to get a Coke, right? You go to CVS, you go to a pizzeria, you go to a restaurant, and there they offer you Coke products. So Coke is creating this product. They're of course taking the natural resources of the cane sugar, whatever, producing the product, and then they're selling it to another retailer to sell it to the consumer. However, Honda is more of an example of finished goods because they are, and again, we'll get to this, but they also count as tertiary sector because they produce their own vehicles. They have their factories that create the cars. And then when you want to go buy a Honda car, you go to a Honda dealership. So they're also selling it directly to you as a consumer. And of course, finished goods, this can be both domestic or imported. That's a small distinction to make, but that's, in case that comes up in an exam. Then let's get to the tertiary sector. This is service and retail directly to consumers. They tend to rely on primary and secondary sectors because they need things to come from them so that they can sell. And again, the thing is, when I say many companies cover multiple sectors, that is completely true. There are many companies that are secondary and tertiary. They're producing and selling, or even they're extracting from nature, producing and providing. This would include things like retail sales, transportation, banking, restaurants, entertainment. You name it. There's a ton of different businesses in the sector. There's a ton of examples, but pretty much anything you're going to, your typical J.C. Penney, Target kind of thing, a bank like J.P. Morgan, any kind of restaurant you go to, all those things, tertiary sector. So that's selling it right to the consumer, product or service. The quaternary sector. This is the one where it gets a bit weird and abstract because they're breaking out of the typical, business kind of model here. But this is intellectual services or intellectual activities and innovation services. That's going to be government, education, library, scientific research, and IT. So these are things, you're really passing kind of level of just product, and this is going to a separate level. This is, as I said, a bit separate from the rest of the rest of the sector. All right, we're about halfway there. I will let you guys know I have this huge stack of notes. This is page 1, page 2, and this is again 1.1. So it's a big run, but we're going to do our best to get there. All right. Now, another part that they briefly mention is the impacts of changing between different sectors. How, especially if you change to the tertiary sector, it can produce a lot of changes in the business. In a country, especially if you change it, if you change from, because what typically happens is less developed countries are primary sector, secondary sector, because there it's a lot cheaper to do any kind of production, and you don't need customers, right? If you're primary secondary, you're selling in a lot of cases to another retailer to then sell your product. So that's why you'll have a lot of exploited countries, like countries in Africa that they are taking, oil out of them. Those countries are almost exclusively primary sector countries because no one in those countries is buying the products that are made. We're the ones in the Western world, in America and in Europe who are buying these products. So they tend to be primary sector. However, when they move to tertiary sector, that's when things really change because they can make a lot more money off of it. So when they tend to move from the manufacturing to this kind of, retail, it raises the standard of education, creates more job opportunities, helps to develop the country. It has a lot of beneficial changes. For an actual business, it can create a lot of different changes. It really depends on the type of business that it is. In a lot of cases, though, it just opens up the business to move from, primary, secondary, to tertiary. Because all of a sudden, you're going from just the production creation to now you're in direct contact with the client. So that means, it can mean less employees and higher wages. It can mean more innovation. It can mean more distributors, improved quality of products. It can mean more competition because you're moving into a different, different way of operation. It can mean higher demand because of the way things are working now. It can mean a lot of things. It can also allow outsourcing. It really does open up the business in a lot of ways. Then getting to their two final kind of major points they have to deal with. All right. One of them is entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. This is a big distinction to make, and I think one of the most important parts of the business management, material to remember. Entrepreneurship. I think this is one thing we all know. Entrepreneur is someone who makes business. We think of the Bill Gates, the Elon Musk's out there, right? There's someone who's got some money. They're going out there to create a business. They have this big idea. It's a big risk, big reward type of system, because your business works out and you make a lot of money, or if you take the fall, you take the fall. You have to get the capital yourself. You have to organize everything. You're taking a lot of risks, but you also have a lot higher rewards, and you have a lot of autonomy. And again, it's about using creativity, creating business ideas, and trying to make something new, bring a new business into the world. Intrapreneurship is doing the same, but within the constraints of an existing business. So this would be someone who's taking the capital from the business, is an employee of that organization, and is using their resource to undertake a product or a project that would be of an entrepreneurial style. So, taking on a new venture, but within the company of Microsoft, let's say, trying to take Microsoft in a different direction, but you're still within the company. They're rewarded in the form of a paycheck because, again, they're still an employee of the business, and they don't act autonomously because they're still limited by that business. And they're still dependent on the restrictions and all the other resources of the company. So as a result, intrapreneurship is safer because you have the company, you're using the resources, you have them as a backup. However, less autonomy. But they're both ways to kind of take these big ideas and turn them into reality through the creation of the business, or the creation of the venture. Then they talk about the reasons for starting a business. All these are common sense. The biggest one, though, if they ask you an example of this, is going to be profit, which is the positive difference between revenues and costs. That's the definition, but just it means making some money. And then we get to the final part of the section, which we are 12 minutes in, so my apologies. Final part of the section, which is how to start a business. Now, here's how to do that. First thing you got to do, identify a market. Find a place that you can sell a product in, or a way you can sell a product. Better if it's something niche, because there will be less competition, but you can really do whatever you want. Second thing is to consider different factors, possible problems. Now, there are two types of problems, internal and external. The internal-external distinction is also something in business management. It's very common. Probably in my later videos, we'll be talking about this a lot. Internal, this can be things, direct examples from the book are things like lack of land, you don't have to appeal to a customer base, or maybe there isn't a present customer base looking for your product, or you don't have any manpower, no employees available for the kind of work you want to get done. The other type is external. So this would be anything that you can't control, things like terrorists, politics, limited resources, things like that. All right, the third is you got to figure out the structure of the business. Now, that would just be, what system are you going to have for managing, what kind of leadership style you're going to have, et cetera, et cetera. These are all things we'll get into in later chapters. They get really deep into these topics, but to know what kind of style you want. And the final thing is the business plan. Now, this has a very specific kind of structure to it and aims. Basically, with the business plan, you want to first state what the aims and objectives of your business are going to be. It's meant as a planning tool to state kind of what's the blueprint of how is this business going to come into reality. And it's so that you can give it to investors and banks so that they can decide whether or not they want to invest in your company. The elements of a business plan are quite numerous. They are, first, you got to state what's the name of the business, what type of business is going to be, what are its aims and objectives, what are the details of the owner, what's his name, et cetera, et cetera. Then you got to list what your product is going to be, what you're offering, or what's your service, what's the market for this product, how are you going to be getting financing for this product, who's going to be working for you, who's going to be the personnel, and how are you going to market this product? What's your marketing mix going to be to get your customers? And again, marketing mix is another key part of IB, and we'll get to that later. However, that brings us to the end of 1.1. Congratulations for getting to the end of this video. That's just a quick kind of summary of all these things. In 12 minutes, you should really have all the key points of 1.1, which I'd say one of the simpler chapters. Hopefully, we'll be getting quicker in the later ones. And also, I will include these summaries will include high-level chapters because I with Dum Dum, and I'm doing business management high level. So you're going to be getting the full information for all of those who need it. Anyway, best of luck with your exams and your studies, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.